Stay behind the line, rookie. Lieutenant Colonel Darius Wexler said it loud enough for every operator on the Glassneedle staging floor to hear, and he held Vera Langford's small blue notebook between two gloved fingers like it was a mess hall receipt. The tactical alarm was already pulsing amber across the canvas walls. Outside, the sandstorm clawed at the ridge wire with a long metallic scream. A cable clerk does not read a battlefield. Vera stood beside a burned spool of field cable with dust on her sleeves, a service rifle she had not touched leaning 6 feet away, and K9 Micah pressed against her left knee. The dog's ears were flat, not from fear, but from calculation. His nose tracked the north granite wall where the maps showed nothing but empty stone. The air smelled of hot dust, scorched powder from the morning range, diesel exhaust, and the bitter ozone scent that always came before hidden electronics woke up. Vera said nothing. Wexler flipped open the notebook, saw columns of numbers, wind arrows, temperature shifts, and 3 circled grid references, then laughed once and turned it toward Strike Team. This is what is delaying my assault? A weather diary and a nervous dog? A few men smiled because rank had given them permission. The brass casings from a nearby weapons check hit the floor in bright, clean clinks, each one sharper than the last. Beyond the command tent, the storm dragged sheets of sand through the floodlights until the whole valley looked like a moving wall. Micah alerted toward the northern wall, then returned to the damaged radio module holding the cached route packet. Vera translated the 2 cues into a single grid along the northern approach. Vera's eyes dropped to the grid. Wrong by 287 meters, she thought. The approved route line had been shifted, not by accident, not by wind, not by terrain correction. The original memory cached in a damaged radio module still showed the safer western shelf. Wexler's printed overlay forced 241 soldiers into a channel where sound would die, drones would drift, and muzzle flashes could hide behind heated stone. Vera reached for her notebook calmly, and Wexler pulled it back. You are assigned to cable recovery, Staff Sergeant. Your job is to count wire, tag batteries, and stay out of grown men's work. The sandstorm hammered the antenna mast hard enough to make the support pins sing. A gust pushed grit through the tent seam and across Vera's lips, dry as ground glass. Micah's nostrils flared again, and the dog gave one low warning sound toward the ridge, where a buried transmitter was cycling every 6.3 seconds. He smells current. Vera kept her face still, but her thumb moved once against her cargo pocket, counting the seconds between the invisible pulses. 3 reconnaissance drones had blacked out at the same coordinate, each failure separated by 47 seconds. Ground wind was moving south, upper dust was shearing east, and the ridge smoke from the range pits was curling west, 3 layers fighting each other like stacked rivers. Wexler had acknowledged every warning, classified each one as non-actionable, and moved the column anyway. Step back from my map, he ordered. Vera looked at the digital clock above the operations board. 8 minutes until movement. On the far screen, Glassneedle Ridge waited in pale gray outlines, its northern throat narrow, silent, and perfectly shaped for a kill lane. On the lower margin of the map, someone had entered a distant observation point, 3,731 meters from the rear cable station. Too far for ordinary correction, too precise to be random. Vera finally took back the notebook when Wexler shoved it against her chest. She opened to a clean line, wrote 5 hours, 43 minutes, and 17 seconds, then wrote his exact words beneath it. Outside, another casing dropped, another alarm tone pulsed, and Micah fixed on the northern wall while Vera marked the false route herself. Vera looked once at the ridge, once at the shifted coordinate, and understood the worst. Part before the first shot was fired. Someone had not misread the battlefield. Someone had sold it. Vera closed the notebook and crossed to the damaged radio rack before Wexler could call the formation to move. The receiver's cracked display still held a cached navigation packet from 458, its western route running along a shelf of basalt 287 meters from the line, now glowing on the command board. She matched the packet checksum against the printed overlay, Then check the authorization stamp beneath Wexler's digital signature. This route was changed 11 minutes ago. Micah moved beside her without command, nose low, drawing in the layered smells of canvas, machine oil, warm circuitry, and powder residue carried from the weapons pit. His head snapped toward the northern wall when a hidden transmitter pulsed again, faint enough to miss beneath the sandstorm's howl. Vera counted 6.3 seconds before the next pulse and marked it in blue ink. Active guidance beacon. She carried the radio module to the operations table, where Wexler stood over his team leaders with one hand planted on the false route. Sand rattled against the tense skin like dry shot, and somewhere outside a belt-fed weapon completed a function check, spent links falling onto a steel tray with thin metallic clicks. Vera placed the cached coordinates beside the map and kept her voice level. Sir, the original route follows the western shelf. The current overlay moves the column into a confined channel with overlapping elevation. Wexler did not examine the module. He looked at her dusty sleeves, then at Micah, as though neither belonged near an operations table. The team leaders waited in silence while the movement clock dropped below 6 minutes. Your access ends at the maintenance cage, he said. Vera pointed to the drone loss marks. All 3 aircraft had failed over grid reference November 7-4, separated by 47 seconds, each reporting a brief magnetic deviation before telemetry vanished. Ground wind was running 8.7 knots south-southwest, while the upper dust stream moved east at 14.2 knots, creating a cross-layer shear strong enough to displace a long-range round by several meters at 3,731 meters. Relative humidity was 19%, and a heated granite was pushing unstable vertical lift through the northern cut. That is not dead terrain. Wexler leaned closer, his voice quiet enough to sound controlled. You are reading maintenance noise and animal behavior as intelligence. Micah ignored the map and fixed on the northern wall as the ozone scent strengthened. Vera followed his line of attention back to the altered grid. Vera noticed a faint tremor in the water inside a metal cup, 2 regular for the storm and 2 localized for vehicle traffic. Personnel were moving behind the granite face. There's a team inside that wall. Wexler straightened and ordered the communications sergeant to remove Vera from the command net. Her handset went silent before she could repeat the warning, and her tactical display changed from green access to gray restriction. He then took her GPS unit, revoked her weapons cage authorization, and assigned 2 soldiers to keep her inside the recovery section until the column cleared the valley entrance. Vera recorded each order with its exact time. At 5 hours, 47 minutes, and 9 seconds, Wexler authorized movement. At 5 hours, 47 minutes, and 22 seconds, he rejected a request for an additional drone sweep. At 5 hours, 47 minutes, and 41 seconds, the first vehicles crossed the departure marker. Micah turned sharply toward the ridge and released a low growl that vibrated through his chest. Vera listened to the sand tearing across the antenna mast, smelled hot insulation from the overloaded radios, and watched the first platoon icons enter the altar corridor. He knows they are waiting. The final vehicle passed the control point. For 1 second, every tactical screen remained green. Then the drone feeds collapsed together. The GPS grid shifted 14 meters east, and every radio in the tent dissolved into static. Static swallowed the command net. Then the first burst of automatic fire rolled through Glassneedle Valley like sheet metal tearing in half. 19 firing points opened from staggered granite shelves, their muzzle flashes buried behind curtains of heated dust and their angles overlapping the altered route with deliberate precision. On the operations screen, 241 blue icons compressed inside the northern channel, while the sandstorm screamed through the antenna braces and empty brass struck rock with bright, irregular clicks. Contact both walls. The lead platoon tried to reverse, but a disabled vehicle blocked the narrowest turn and forced the column to bunch beneath the ridge. Drone feeds remained black. GPS markers jumped 14 meters east and then 9 meters north, and the digital terrain model began drawing friendly positions inside solid stone. The air in the tent filled with scorched insulation, diesel fumes, and the bitter smell of propellant drifting down from the valley mouth. "We are boxed in." Wexler ordered the designated marksman to engage the northern flashes, refusing 3 separate requests to withdraw to the western shelf. Sergeant First Class Nolan Price settled behind a .300 Norma rifle, dialed for 1,846 meters, and fired at a spotter visible for less than 2 seconds. The round crossed a lower wind layer at 9.1 knots, entered an opposing shear at 15.6 knots, and missed the target by nearly 4 meters after 3.4 seconds of flight. "Send another." Price corrected left, but the heated granite lifted the second round through a rising column of air and drove it high into the ridge face. A second sniper team engaged from the southern berm at 2,113 meters, using humidity data fixed at 19%, even as the storm pushed denser air through the cut. Their first shot broke low, their second vanished into dust, and their third struck an empty firing slit after the hostile shooter had already shifted. Wind call is false. The jammer buried the encrypted command net, but the cracked receiver Vera had rebuilt still-caught fragments from the unit's low-power analog emergency channel. Voices arrived in fragments, a medic asking for smoke, a squad leader reporting fire from above, a vehicle commander warning that the eastern wall was moving with concealed personnel. Beneath the radio chatter, Micah's breathing changed from steady panting to 3 short pulls through the nose. He has the source. The dog moved toward the rear flap, ignoring the 2 soldiers assigned to hold Vera in place, and stopped only when a pulse of electromagnetic interference flickered across the receiver every 6.3 seconds. Vera watched the needle jump, counted the interval, and followed Micah into the storm without touching a weapon. Sand struck her face like ground glass, spent casings rolled against the revetment, and the smell of burned powder thickened as friendly teams fired blindly into the ridge. This is not suppression. Micah led her behind the cable recovery shelter to a narrow break between stacked equipment crates and a fractured blast wall. Through alternating bands of dust, Vera found an exposed relay massed beneath the overhang, its antenna collar visible for less than a second at a time. She raised compact optics, measured the line, and wrote the numbers without hesitation. Range 3,731 meters, azimuth 41.7 degrees. Elevation gained 612 meters. Lower wind 8.9 knots left, upper shear 14.8 knots right. Estimated bullet flight 6.2 seconds. Primary relay. Another pulse came from the slit, and every hostile firing point adjusted within the same second. Wexler shouted for the trapped units to advance uphill, even though the ridge was cutting them apart faster with every order. Vera lowered her breathing until her heart rate settled at 52 beats per minute and looked toward the recovery cage behind her. Inside it, beneath a red tag marked for disassembly, rested a long rifle no one else believed could still fire. Vera crossed the recovery cage in 6 silent steps and cut the red disposal tag from the rifle with the edge of her notebook clip. The weapon was a prototype .375 class long-action rifle with a deadfire control module, a scratched optic, and a bolt coated in preservation grease. But the bore remained unobstructed and the mechanical elevation drum still tracked. Behind her, the valley thundered with overlapping gunfire while sand scraped across the shelter roof and hot brass rolled beneath the equipment racks. Electronics are optional. She stripped the failed module, wiped the bowl clean, and seated a 5-round magazine from the sealed test case beneath the rifle. A young communications specialist stared at her hands as she checked headspace, trigger reset, and optic movement without wasting a second. Micah stood beside the firing gap, nose lifted into the storm, reading changes the instruments could not separate. Watch the dog. Vera settled behind the fractured blast wall and opened the blue notebook to a page already divided into range, pressure, temperature, spin drift, and vertical correction. The target slit lay 3,731 meters away and 612 meters above her position, with relative humidity at 18.7% and barometric pressure falling through 27.91 inches. Lower wind pushed left at 8.9 knots, The middle layer crossed right at 12.6, and the upper ridge flow accelerated to 15.1 before collapsing behind the granite crown. 3 rivers of air. Using the test round's recorded muzzle velocity and drag table, she calculated 6.24 seconds of flight, including transonic loss in the final segment, then applied corrections for Coriolis, spin drift, and thermal lift. Her pulse fell from 52 to 47 beats per minute as she inhaled through her nose and released half the breath. Micah's left ear flattened, then rose, then flattened again as the next gust crossed the valley. Not yet. Wexler's voice burst through the recovery receiver, ordering military police to seize Vera before she fired. 2 soldiers entered the shelter, but the communications specialist blocked them long enough to point at the trapped unit icons flashing red on the damaged screen. Outside, another sniper round missed high, and the hostile network shifted 19 firing positions in perfect sequence. 6.3 seconds. Vera kept the reticle on the relay mast and used Micah's pressure change reaction only to confirm the lull already forming in the loose dust. Micah went rigid a fraction before the dust stream slackened across the firing gap, confirming the pressure change Vera had already seen through the optic. 1 heartbeat passed through Vera's chest, her shoulders settled, and the reticle stopped trembling in the narrow silence before the next. Now, the rifle cracked once, driving a hard-pressure wave through the shelter and throwing the smell of burned propellant into the hot air. The projectile crossed the first wind layer, climbed through the opposing shear, and remained out of sight for 6.24 seconds before striking the exposed relay mast 6 inches below the antenna collar. The impact severed the synchronized data link, and the relay went dark. Every hostile firing point lost synchronization at once. Network down. Vera worked the bolt and shifted to an exposed observer at 2,684 meters, where wind had fallen to 7.3 knots and flight time shortened to 4.61 seconds. Over the next 43 seconds, she disabled 2 exposed observers and 1 secondary relay. The coordinates in her notebook allowed the trapped platoons to suppress the remaining firing positions. No miracles. The trapped platoons began withdrawing through the opening she created, dragging equipment and wounded teammates toward the western shelf while friendly marksmen finally received accurate coordinates. Vera lowered the rifle only when the last red icon disappeared from the channel. She looked at the captured relay code flickering on the recovered screen and recognized Wexler's command authorization embedded inside. It, only mathematics, physics, and a commander who thought no one would check his numbers. Before anyone touched the relay, Vera ordered the communications specialist to begin a continuous body camera recording and called the unit evidence custodian. After the device was photographed in place and entered on an evidence log, she shielded its screen from the blowing sand and read the authorization string. The authorization string beneath the targeting packet matched the command key Wexler had used at 5 hours, 47 minutes, and 9 seconds, and the transmission log showed the false route had been sent outside the perimeter 12 minutes before the column moved. Micah lowered his nose to the casing and inhaled the same bitter ozone scent he had detected beside the northern wall. It came from inside. The surviving platoons reached the western shelf in broken files, carrying damaged radios, empty magazines, and teammates whose uniforms were gray with granite dust. Spent brass clattered from their gear as they crossed the revetment, and the sharp odor of burned propellant followed them into the recovery area. Vera checked the rifle's chamber, cleared it, and wrote the final engagement data into her notebook. First shot 3,731 meters, lower wind 8.9 knots, upper shear 15.1 knots, humidity 18.7%, flight time 6.24 seconds, heart rate 47. Numbers do not change afterward. An evidence custodian presented 3 recovered guidance modules under seal, each tagged with its recovery location, time, and collecting soldier. Their serial plates have been ground down, but faint electrochemical marks remain beneath the scoring, and Vera reconstructed the original sequence by comparing spacing, alloy discoloration, and inspection stamps. All 3 belonged to a shipment declared destroyed 6 weeks earlier under Wexler's authorization. Missing inventory. Micah alerted on a sealed transit case recovered from the ridge. The evidence custodian photographed the latch, opened the case under continuous recording, and exposed U.S. military tracking labels, procurement seals, and a compact transmitter programmed with the same 6.3-second pulse used to coordinate the ambush. The device held a cached burst message containing the altered grid, the movement time, and a list of personnel assigned to the inspection team traveling with the column. They were the targets. Vera opened the personnel manifest and identified 7 logistics auditors, 2 weapons technicians, and a contracting investigator who had recently questioned discrepancies in Wexler's disposal records. The assault force had not been chosen only to seize the ridge. It had been arranged to place those witnesses in the most exposed vehicles inside the Northern Channel. The sandstorm had been expected to erase electronic evidence, while the hostile firing line would make every loss appear tactical. The ridge was the cover story. Wexler entered the recovery shelter with 4 military police soldiers and ordered everyone away from the equipment. His uniform was clean except for dust along the boots, and his voice carried the calm authority of a man who had already prepared the official report. He accused Vera of contaminating captured material, disobeying a lawful order, and firing an unauthorized weapon across friendly positions. Step away from the case. Vera did not move until she photographed the transmitter number beside the matching entry in her notebook. Wexler reached for the blue cover, but Micah placed himself between them without growling, body rigid and eyes fixed on the colonel's right hand. Vera saw a smear of black sealant on Wexler's glove, identical to the compound around the transmitter housing. That sealant places you in contact with the transmitter housing. His expression changed for less than a second. Then he ordered the police to seize the rifle, the relay, the transit case, Vera's communications equipment, and the blue notebook. He did not know she had already transmitted time-stamped images of every page to the unit's legal hold server. Vera allowed them to take everything else. At 8 hours, 16 minutes, and 32 seconds, Wexler transmitted a preliminary report claiming she had endangered the unit through reckless fire. At 8 hours, 18 minutes, and 4 seconds, he requested her immediate suspension. At 8 hours, 20 minutes, and 11 seconds, military police informed Vera she would return to base under guard for a formal hearing. She watched the police seal the notebook, then looked once toward the ridge, where the relay mast and 3 exposed positions carried the only impact marks she needed. He survived the battlefield, she thought. Now he wants the paperwork to finish what the ambush could not. The hearing room smelled of floor wax, cold coffee, and the faint electrical heat of recording equipment when military police escorted Vera to the defense table. Micah lay at her left boot under orders from the veterinary detachment, his eyes following every uniform that crossed the sealed door. Across the room, Wexler arranged 3 folders before him and wore the composed expression of an officer expecting the system to erase his mistakes. The battlefield has changed. A senior judge advocate served as the Article 32 preliminary hearing officer, facing a digital evidence screen displaying Wexler's reconstructed timeline. His report claimed Vera had abandoned her assigned station, seized an unsafe prototype rifle, fired across friendly lanes, and compromised a planned assault through unauthorized engagement. The transcript omitted the altered route, the lost drone feeds, and every warning recorded before 5 hours, 47 minutes, and 9 seconds. A clean story. Government counsel played helmet camera footage beginning only seconds before Vera's first shot. The image showed sand crossing the firing gap, the rifle recoiling, and friendly units moving beneath the line of fire, but the earlier command traffic had been removed. He described the 3,731-meter impact as statistical luck produced by panic and insisted the hostile network had already been failing. One fortunate round does not excuse disobedience. Vera kept both hands flat on the table, while the prosecutor listed the physical conditions as evidence against her. The wind had shifted through 3 layers at 8.9, 12.6, and 15.1 knots. Humidity had fallen to 18.7%. Pressure had dropped to 27.91 inches. Estimated flight time had exceeded 6 seconds. No ordinary cable recovery specialist, he argued, could have solved those variables under fire without reckless guessing. That is his strongest point. Wexler testified that he had never received a credible warning about the Northern Channel. He denied changing the route, denied recognizing the recovered guidance modules, and stated that Micah's reactions had no intelligence value under military doctrine. When asked why Vera's command net access had been revoked minutes before the ambush, he called it a routine measure to preserve communications discipline. Routine has timestamps. Vera's counsel requested the original telemetry, but Wexler's staff produced files with damaged metadata and missing authentication chains. The hearing officer examined the notebook and questioned whether the handwritten entries could have been added after the engagement. Vera answered by reciting the first-shot solution from memory. Elevation gained 612 meters, azimuth 41.7 degrees, Coriolis correction east, 6.24 seconds of flight, heart rate reduced from 52 to 47 beats per minute. The round followed the math. Wexler smiled when the hearing officer noted that technical skill did not automatically excuse disobedience. Government counsel requested referral to a general court-martial on charges of insubordination and reckless endangerment. Micah suddenly lifted his head toward the corridor 3 seconds before footsteps stopped outside the door. Someone important. The hearing officer turned as the security officer opened the chamber. General Julian Crossfield entered alone, for stars visible on each shoulder and a thick classified folder secure beneath one arm. Most of its cover sheet had been obscured by black classification bars. Only a program seal and 2 words remained readable. Quiet parallax. Crossfield placed the classified folder on the evidence table, and the room fell silent except for the recorder's low fan and the soft click of Micah's identification tags. He did not salute the panel, explain his arrival, or look at Wexler until the security officer sealed the chamber for restricted testimony. The black bars covered nearly 90% of Vera's record, leaving only qualification codes, deployment dates, and the call sign, quiet parallax, visible beneath the program seal. Staff Sergeant Langford did not guess. Crossfield opened the first authorized page and confirmed that Vera had served in Night Measure, a compartmented program built around manual long-range engagement when satellites, laser rangefinders, and digital fire control systems could not be trusted. Her archived evaluations listed successful solutions in cross-layer winds, electromagnetic denial zones, and thermal inversion corridors almost identical to Glassneedle Valley. One notation stated that she could reconstruct a ballistic path from physical evidence after total sensor failure. The rifle recognized no legend. It obeyed physics. Government counsel objected that the classified history could not establish what occurred during the operation. Crossfield agreed, closed the folder, and turned toward Vera without offering rescue through reputation. The hearing officer ordered the proceeding to continue on admissible evidence alone. Use the notebook. Vera placed the small blue book beneath the document camera and opened it to the entries beginning at 5 hours, 43 minutes, and 17 seconds. The first page showed the altered route, the original cached grid, the 287-meter displacement, and the 3 drone losses separated by 47 seconds. The next recorded lower wind at 8.9 knots, middle shear at 12.6, upper flow at 15.1, humidity at 18.7%, pressure at 27.91 inches, and predicted flight time at 6.24 seconds. Those figures existed before the shot. A forensic examiner compared the ink sequence with the notebook's pressure impressions and confirmed that later pages had been written over the marks left by earlier field entries. Server technicians restored the original route packet from an isolated backup and found Wexler's command credential attached to the change made 11 minutes before movement. The recovered relay log showed the same credential transmitting the convoy grid outside the perimeter 12 minutes before the ambush. Authentication does not have opinions. Crossfield then requested the collar camera file from Micah's veterinary training archive. The video showed Vera warning Wexler, Micah indicating the northern wall, Wexler removing her network access, and the movement order proceeding after the warnings. Audio captured his voice dismissing the dog, the notebook, and the drone failures before the first hostile weapon fired. The warning came first. Procurement investigators displayed the serial number reconstruction from the captured guidance modules. Each component belonged to equipment Wexler had certified as destroyed, while contracting records linked the missing inventory to shell vendors controlled through an intermediary account. The personnel manifest proved that 10 auditors and technicians investigating those losses had been placed in the most exposed vehicles. This was not tactical failure. Wexler's face lost its color when Crossfield, acting as the general court-martial convening authority, directed the operations center to suspend his command credentials pending investigation. He attempted to call the records incomplete, but the backup server produced his post-engagement edits, including the deletion of Vera's warnings and the insertion of a false claim that the hostile network was already collapsing before her first round. Vera read the final line from her notebook. 3,731 meters, 612 meters elevation gain, 6.24 seconds flight, heart rate 47, command relay disabled on impact. The numbers survived your report. Crossfield signaled to the security officer. 2 CID Special. Agents entered with a military magistrate's authorization based on the restored server logs and procurement evidence. They advised Wexler that he was being apprehended for suspected falsification of operational records, unlawful disclosure of movement data, diversion of controlled equipment, deliberate endangerment, and retaliation. They secured his wrists and escorted him from the chamber without resistance. No one raised a voice. Micah rested his chin on Vera's boot while Crossfield closed the redacted file and looked toward the panel. The hearing officer closed the record. I will recommend that no charge be referred against Staff Sergeant Langford. After the hearing officer found the government's evidence unreliable, Crossfield, acting as the convening authority, withdrew every charge against Vera. Wexler was suspended from command, his credentials were revoked pending investigation, and CD transferred the evidence package to military prosecutors. Crossfield returned the blue notebook to Vera without ceremony. Your numbers held. 48 hours later, the surviving members of the task force assembled on the western shelf beneath Glassneedle Ridge. The storm had passed, but sand still moved in thin silver lines across the granite, gathering around spent casings and scorched fragments of communications equipment. The air smelled of dust, weapon oil, and the faint burned metal residue left by the disabled relay. Formation, attention. 241 soldiers stood in ordered ranks facing the ridge that had nearly become their grave. Several wore field dressings, others leaned subtly against their stronger legs, but no one broke formation. The operators who had laughed when Wexler mocked Vera's notebook now watched her approach in silence. Eyes front. Vera wore the same faded utility uniform she had worn in the recovery cage. A compact backpack rested over one shoulder. The blue notebook was secured inside her breast pocket, and Micah walked beside her with the calm precision of a dog who had already measured every person in the formation. There was no metal case waiting for her, no podium, and no prepared statement. That was her condition. General Julian Crossfield stepped from the command group and stopped 3 paces in front of Vera. 4 stars marked each shoulder, but he did not speak as a superior addressing a subordinate. He looked first toward the ridge, then toward the soldiers whose lives had been preserved by a 3,731-meter solution calculated through 8.9 knot lower wind, 15.1 knot upper shear, 18.7% humidity, and 6.24 seconds of flight. Staff Sergeant Langford. Vera stopped, heels aligned, face unreadable. Crossfield raised his right hand in a formal salute and held it. 1 second later, every officer in formation returned the salute while the enlisted ranks locked to attention, silent and motionless, including the operators who had laughed at Vera and the military police soldiers who had escorted her to the hearing. No one had been ordered to look impressed. Respect does not require applause. Vera returned the salute once, precise and without visible emotion. Crossfield lowered his hand only after she did. He offered her a position inside a restored Special Mission Command, but she gave no answer beyond a brief glance toward Micah and the ridge. Some assignments are never announced. Vera adjusted the strap of her backpack and walked between the two ranks. No one spoke as she passed. At the edge of the staging area, the floodlights ended and the service road disappeared into the dark cut between the rocks. Micah entered the shadows first, and Vera followed without looking back. By the time the formation was dismissed, only her boot prints remained beside the dog's tracks, and the wind was already erasing both. Crossfield watched the darkness for a moment, then closed his hand around the unused commendation orders in his pocket. Vera had left behind no speech, only one sentence written on the final page of the blue notebook before she departed. Real strength is remaining precise when authority becomes reckless. If you respect the silent courage and impossible skills of these undercover heroes, please hit the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel for more stories. This story is a fictional military narrative created for entertainment, reflection, and educational purposes. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental.